Councillors, I put agenda item CCS 19/048, sale of MORUYA Racecourse, moved by Councillor Pollock, seconded by Councillor Tate. Councillors, any questions or debate? Councillor Constable.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and with the acquiescence of the mover and the seconder, I'd like to make a change in the event that this motion does get up. I'll bring this over for Kylie to type, and the amendment is that monies received from the sale of the MORUYA Racecourse be applied to Council's pathway strategy.
It's up to the mover and seconder as to whether they would support that, Councillor.
No, it has to be a separate amendment.
So, Councillor, it has not been accepted as an amendment.
If it's not been accepted as a change, I shall put that forward as an amendment to the motion. Thank you.
Certainly. So, councillors, we have an amendment before you. I need a seconder for that. Seconded by Councillor McGinley.
Madam Mayor, I will clarify. If I'm inadequate with my wording in this space, the intention is that be applied for utilisation within the benefit of the pathways throughout the whole of the Shire.
I think your intent is pretty clear, Councillor. So we have an amendment, councillors, before you, that the monies received from the sales be applied to Council's pathway strategy. We have it moved and seconded. Councillors, any questions or debate on that? Councillor McGinley.
Thank you. Just getting in quick there. Basically, there's a couple of things I'd just like to make comment upon. There was a speaker who was a few minutes late with getting his request to speak in public forum this morning, and he was a few minutes late in getting his. I'll just go back to it. He was a few minutes late. But one of the things that he mentioned I thought was a good point, and I took it on board when I read the submission. And it's around the whole idea, and I think actually it was mentioned this morning by Councillor May. It's around the confidentiality of the offered amount or the.
Councillor, I just would like to remind you we're speaking to the amendment currently, not the main report.
Okay. All right.
Would you like to speak to the amendment?
Sorry, no, that's a good correction. I was actually thinking of the main debate, so okay, I'll shut up.
If you would like to hold it for the main debate and speak to the amendment. Councillors, Councillor Pollock.
I don't think in any situation where council receives income that perhaps had not been budgeted for at any stage should be considered other than in the context of the quarterly review.
Councillor McGinley.
Now I will talk about the amendment, the difference here. Look, I've seconded this and I'm feeling a bit favourable towards it, even if it's not the usual thing we do. Essentially, my understanding is that we have a community asset here worth X amount of dollars, and if we are going to sell that community asset, it would be good to spread the proceeds of that sale widely across the community, and the pathways looks an ideal mechanism for doing that, because we could do with more pathways throughout the entire Shire. It sounds like a reasonable proposition for councillors to consider.
Councillor, look, I'm going to speak against the amendment, and the reason I'm going to speak against the amendment is because, look, it may be a good place for us to recycle the funds that we get into pathways, but I do believe that there may be other opportunities also. There may be other suggestions that come forward, and I think that the process for us to look at those things is, in the appropriate time and space, and I do not feel comfortable at this stage in this recommendation of allocating it towards the pathway strategy. Councillor, do you want to speak to your amendment, or is there anybody else would like to speak?
A question, thank you, Madam Mayor. Director O'Reilly, could you explain to me the difference between the suggestion that the amendment that Councillor Constable has put, that the money be applied directly, or the process that we would normally go through as we do budgets, etc.?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the amendment proposed would effectively internally restrict those monies, whatever those monies are, for the purpose outlined, being anything within the pathways strategy, whereas normal process is any proceeds from the sale of assets becomes part of the consolidated cash balances that is then utilised throughout the process for the usually either through a quarterly review, the delivery program, operational plan, any of those plans that are adopted by council for the utilisation of those funds. This would restrict it to one purpose.
So, I think probably I'm being a little bit slow on the uptake.
Excuse me,
on this.
Councillor Nathan, just a minute. The General Manager would just like to add something to that before you follow up.
Through the Mayor, so just to perhaps expand on what Mr O'Reilly has said, so what Council will do will to look at all the priorities across the Shire in terms of projects. So I think that just the word was missing. So it's very important that Council consider all priorities and look at everything in relation to how it spends its money, and that would be part of the normal budget process. So I think the word priorities wasn't quite clear in Mr O'Reilly's response.
That's going part way to where my rather foggy brain at this moment is going. So when you look at projects and priorities, we would include, for example, seeing as it's topical, the new dam. And if we need money for the water catchment process, etc., if the funds that are received from this potential sale of the racecourse was limited and applied as that amendment suggests, it would stop perhaps potentially something like water, dam, etc.
Effectively, yes.
It would stop the water dam effectively.
No,
yeah.
it would stop it being allocated towards a different project, Councillor, I think is what Councillor Nathan was trying to.
I appreciate that clarification.
Councillor Constable, would you like to close the debate on the amendment?
I would like to close the debate. I'd just like to some advice from Director Sharp on the backlog that we do have for within the pathway strategy as it exists at the present time. Number of years, kilometres, that type of stuff would be appreciated.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Councillors, you adopted the pathway strategy a few years ago. At that stage it had a bit over $12 million worth of works to do, and we are progressing well on that. We've been able to leverage good funding. You had a report not that long ago, Alec, with an additional $306,000, I think, from the New South Wales Government. You do have a report coming to you on another offer of $250,000 from the Federal Government as well, I might add, which will embellish that further. You do still have a lot of urban roads out there without pathways, and it is probably a good 10 years worth of work sitting in that at the current rate, assuming we're able to leverage funding as we have been able to do successfully in past years.
Director Sharp. In closing, I'd like to make the community aware that we are selling, potentially going to sell, an asset that is owned Shire-wide. Now, you can say all assets are owned Shire-wide, but Batemans Bay Community Centre, for example, is located in Batemans Bay. But this is a hub that relates to the whole of the Shire. The reason I identified the Pathways strategy as being a benefit, because it does stretch through the linear nature of our Shire, Mooloolah Bay, even as far down as Narooma, might get some benefit and acceleration for this. Even, God forbid, Long Beach might even get some. This also, there's nothing as more important, you know, to a lot of elderly people than having a secure pedestrian access. And the increase in the number of these gopher carts that can be facilitated off-road on these shared pathways led me to the consideration that this was the most appropriate, immediate use for these monies in our increasingly aged population and to service our aged population that we all have to recognise within the Shire. And that's my closing remark, and appreciate putting the vote. Thank you.
Councillors, so I will put the amendment that is before you to the vote. Those in favour? Those in favour are Councillors Constable and Councillor McGinley. Those opposed are myself, Councillor Innes, Councillor Brown, Councillor Main, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Nathan, Councillor Tate and Councillor Pollock. Your amendment has been lost, Councillor. So, councillors, we go back to the original motion as put. Do I have any questions or debate on the original motion? Councillor Brown.
Yes, thanks. Now that we're back to the original recommendation, just a couple of questions. One of the issues that's come up in discussion with different residents around the place that I've spoken to is the future of and the intention of Racing New South Wales to keep it as a racetrack. There's been some discussion and people say, oh, well, you know, once they get it, they can sell it off into residential areas and that sort of stuff. So what I need is probably from either Mr Usher or from Mr O'Reilly is, what is the process, for example, should Racing New South Wales decide that it's all too hard and we'll flog it off and we'll try and rezone it or whatever the case may be. So can you explain to me the process that would entail and the evidence that would be required to facilitate that? Note, and obviously making comment on the current state of the land and the low-lying areas in relation to flooding and that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if you're happy for me to respond.
I'd just make one comment through you, Madam Mayor. Just in relation to the intent, I will defer to Director Usher in relation to the planning considerations. But the purpose of Racing New South Wales under the Thoroughbred Racing Act 1996 is governed by both its functions and its powers. On my review of those sections, nothing in that suggests to me that the development of lands other than for anything in relation to do horse racing is within their purview of their function, or certainly within their power. That's legislated. So I now pass to Director Usher.
So before you continue on, so in essence what we're saying is that any activity that is on a site owned by Racing New South Wales needs to be focused on racing and, dare I say the wrong word, but horse needs, racing needs, and that's what it has to be. So anything they do there has to be related directly to horse racing.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's certainly my reading. Section 14 of the Thoroughbred Racing Act, it has had the power to do anything that's necessary to be done for the connection or exercise of its functions. All of its functions in relation to horse racing. Subsection 2 of 14 lists A through to N. It talks about race courses, jockeys, race clubs, racing, horse racing, etc. There's nothing suggests anything other than it is to do with the horse racing industry, and that's why it exists.
Through you, Madam Mayor. If, and I say if, because it's a bit of a looking down the track a number of years. So I understand there's an existing lease over the land with the Jockey Club for a 50-year period. So if down the track the Racing New South Wales, the landowner, wanted to look at changing the zone, they would need to come to council with a proposal to do that. They need to put forward a planning proposal. That planning proposal would be assessed by staff, taking into consideration council's land use strategies, the strategic direction we had for that area, any environmental constraints in the area, noting that there are RECs on that land. Also considering adjoining land uses, so you have a speedway next door, for example, to understand what potential land use conflicts may exist around that. That would then come to council for consideration, and council would need to make a decision as to whether they wish to proceed or not with the rezoning. So that decision initially would be with the council of the day. And this is, of course, based on the current legislation. If council decided they did want to proceed, then the matter would go to the Department of Planning for a gateway determination, and the Department of Planning would assess and make decision as to whether they believed the proposal had merit, and it would then proceed through the process, which would include community engagement and consultation, consideration of any submissions that would then come back to council for consideration, and ultimately back to the department for a final decision, should council decide to proceed at that point.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Nathan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to add to the debate by reminding people of some of the issues that were raised in public forum earlier today. It seems that there has been a public perception that pardon me, we're selling a public asset, and it was explained as a result of my question to Mr. Kennedy from Racing New South Wales, that in fact Racing New South Wales is, in the jargon, a QAGO, a quasi-autonomous government organisation. In other words, although it's been changed from an asset owned by the Eurobodalla Shire Council, it still remains a public asset. And I think that's a very important issue for people to be aware of. The other issue that came up with Mr. Atkinson, when I asked him about whether it was a betting arena or a gathering place, I loved his answer because I have my once-a-year flutter at the Melbourne Cup. I'm not a betting person, but certainly I thoroughly enjoy the gathering place that the MORUYA Jockey Club have developed, and the idea of another 1.5 million, which was mooted earlier, being spent there, I think is extraordinary. The other point that I'd like to raise for the debate is that we have to our north, just on our borders, a phenomenal horse breeding facility, and to have a course, a race course, like MORUYA's will be, under the auspices of the Racing New South Wales, assuming the sale goes through, I think would bookend this Shire and present us to a fraternity which continue with the sport of kings. And in this country, even Joe Blow, Joe Blow or Mary Jane down the street can participate in the sport of kings.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor McGinley.
Thank you. Going back to a point I was making at the wrong timing, the person who didn't make it in time raised the issue of confidentiality of the agreed amount. And his points were quite different to the one I want to make. He was talking about it's up to the two various public entities, as Councillor Nathan pointed out, public entities acting in the public interest, why they had to show a very good cause, why they should have something remain confidential, and he didn't think that process had been carried through. But put that aside, my concern is it is Racing New South Wales who have requested that it remain confidential, as we heard, because they're in the market of buying race courses and they don't want to give other potential sellers an inkling of what they're willing to pay us. that's fine for them, and I can understand why they might do it, especially with a business focus. But I don't see what good it does this council to deny our ratepayers knowing that, given that we've sent this out for 28 days and said, what do you reckon, folks? But we're not going to tell you the price because it doesn't suit the buyer. Where's the benefit for us?
Through the Mayor, so it might be helpful just to look at Section 10A2 of the Local Government Act, which says, Part D, commercial information of a confidential nature that would, if disclosed, Roman numeral 1, prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied it. So that's the legal context in which Council has determined to keep this confidential.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. There is one other thing, and I'm just again referring back to the speaker this morning, very articulate and professional from Racing New South Wales. He mentioned that in 2010 MORUYA had 5 tab races, which is the one where you make your money, and in 2019 that's up to 13 TAB races. So for 10 years, it looks like we've been going streets ahead. Things have been working really well. The Jockey Club are managing it well. They're actually giving a lot of money to charity. Council gives them... no, I'll leave that bit out. But the fact is, they're going really well, and the implication is, if we sell it, they will continue to go well, or they will go more well. If we don't sell it, will we go backwards? I mean, it's not been stated, but I just want to know, what is the cost to us to say no, that we'd rather keep our community asset?
I think it was made very clear by Scott Kennedy that their strategic plan is that their expansion and efforts will go into the courses which they have identified, which they own.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that point has been made on a number of occasions.
It was made in public forum, but not here on the record.
Okay, it's on the record now, Councillor. Councillors, if there's no further questions, Councillor Mayne.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor. Through you. Look, firstly, congratulations to the committee for the wonderful job they do out there. I'm an agnostic when it comes to this matter, and I have been for some time. Travelling out there after our previous briefing, I got to the last race on Tuesday. It was a heavy 9. Yep, ran third, what I backed, but that's okay. It was long odds. And it's a terrific track, and for all seasons, it's brilliant. And in fact, the radio presenter was saying that a lot of other tracks would have abandoned by that stage. So there's a terrific asset for the Eurobodalla there. Nice. So where I'm struggling, and it's probably a principled comment, the presenter today did a terrific job, as did the chair, etc., and staff have done working through this process. I get all of that. I'm now, as we are all being asked to sell, and let's not underestimate, it is a chunk of land that could be changed. I get the address to allay those concerns and the process that we would have to follow. But at the end of the day, it's a prime piece of real estate right next to an airport on the boom south coast. It's prime. It is prime by definition. It's flat ground right near an airport. The potential, yeah, there's potential. So we will do the pricing as per the guidelines that we would price that parcel of land. Our community will, at a point of time, be it through freedom of information, AGM reports here, or the organisation we heard of earlier, find out the amount of money. I understand why they don't want that shared, and I understand, GM, why that doesn't come on the table today. I am so uncomfortable about the amount of money being put on the table. To truly capture the potential value, because don't forget, effectively, we either hold value or we realise value. That's what we've got here. Hold the value or realise the value. My goodness, when this comes out, the actual figure, I don't think we've realised the potential here. That's the real concern, and puts me in a real conundrum, because there's so many benefits that can come in through this process, and I'm being said, hey, on behalf of the ratepayers who own this, sell it. I can't tell you how much for. It's not enough. I just don't think we have got enough. And that's not to have a go at council staff who I think have done a really good job through the process in negotiating. I get it. It's what happens sometimes. You don't get what you want. I think we're at that impasse. There's not enough on the table. I can't tell the community what it is. I'm uncomfortable with it. Conceptually, a lot of upside. On principle, I won't support it because I can't articulate the price to the community because it's your asset.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to enter into... Oh, maybe.
Right.
Well,
just...
actually, I'll go and put my bit in because I've just said I'm going to enter into the debate. And, you know, whilst you raised the topic, Councillor, of you know, it's just your assumption of your opinion of whether we're getting good value or not. And I would agree with that. I certainly am not a realtor or somebody who is qualified to make, you know, those assessments on values. But I will say this, the market value of the land was assessed by a registered valuer in January 2019. This valuation is based on freehold value and vacant possession. And I think that, you know, as you quite rightly pointed out, I think it is best for us to defer to those who are professional in that space. I have enjoyed going to the races on many occasions, and I have personally witnessed the effort that the MORUYA Jockey Club have put into the wonderful race days that they have out there, and the benefits to our community of the sale to Racing New South Wales, for me, is something that I absolutely do support. I can see that Racing New South Wales, while having ownership, would be absolutely more encouraged to support investment into an asset that they own, working hand in hand as they have done for many years with the MORUYA Jockey Club. I can see enormous benefits and spin-off to our tourism industry, to our horse industry, and even better, to the flow-on to our general community. When we went through a process recently of looking at putting an equine centre out there, some of the figures that were, you know, brought up to this council of the flow-on impacts of having such a strong industry in our local economy were nothing short of outstanding. So I am delighted to be able to support the recommendation that's ahead of us today. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of things. I do disagree with Councillor Mayne in that it's prime real estate. It's flat and floodplain, and it's got a bunker in the middle of it, and it's got an old runway from other track there. So it has had some problematics, both from a heritage and a environmental statistics. So it's hardly prime real estate in the middle of MORUYA. It's adjacent, but it's not in the middle of MORUYA.
Port and a beach.
Look at its value as it's been valued as a racetrack. Some of the things I'd like to one thing I'd like to address is the fact that we've sort of spoken about, and I take the point that what possibly it can do for the future and what exciting things it will be for the future. But at the moment, the MORUYA Jockey Club faces a conundrum. They face, what I think it was correctly, was $1.5 million in requiring to invest in that track. They don't have it. Council doesn't have it. So the chances are that you'll have a demonstrated or a facility there who will diminish in its quality. And therefore that will affect its income, because Racing New South Wales will only have races at meetings that provide certain requirements. For example, we can't get a game of an AFL down here because of the ground surface. So you have to have these facilities to bring the bigger activities here and have continual activity. As I said, to maintain, we have issues out there with, if I understand it, you know, we have female jockeys now requiring space. We have the yards out there who are in, no offence to the current MORUYA Jockey Club, but the yards out there are quite poor in condition. The facility has actually been managed very well, considering the amount of money that they're investing back into the facility. And the other thing too is it's an opportunity cost. We can use, as Constable said, we could possibly use the money in sending it through to the cycleway, the pathway strategy, the pathway commitment. That's what we can do with that particular money, and that would actually free up that cash and also facilitate the impact that the current racetrack has on our bottom line through our accounting processes. So I support the sale of the MORUYA Jockey Club, of the MORUYA racetrack, and in particular I support it because I can see how the MORUYA Jockey Club has had negotiations with Racing New South Wales since we met with Mr. Volandis here some 4 or 5 years. 5 years ago, Peter, we had started this discussion, yeah. So it was really important that over that period of time, the Racing New South Wales have encouraged and encouraged the MORUYA Jockey Club to continue doing their work. But it gets to a point now where the Racing New South Wales are limited where they can spend their money. And they will spend their money on racetracks to provide the right quality service. We don't have the ability to provide that service. We don't have the $1.5 million immediately to inject into that facility. So therefore, I think by having Racing New South Wales taking ownership, they will have ownership of it, they will have tenure, they will have surety, and they will invest because they have surety. So I have no lack of confidence in the sale of this particular asset. It is a very important asset for the community. The community doesn't have very many real estate assets, but I think in this instance, I think the benefit and the support that we can give the MORUYA Jockey Club and the racing industry in the Eurobodalla is one by releasing this property to go to Racing New South Wales for them to invest and make it a wonderful product and a great fill-up for the community of MORUYA and Eurobodalla.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pollock, do you want to close the debate? Oh, apologies, wait. Sorry, Councillor McGinley.
Thank you. Just one other thing, and I just like reminding councillors about this every now and then.
Must be a question, Councillor.
Okay, I just like to make sure that all councillors, when they make their vote on this, have looked at the submissions that came in and the people they came from and bear those submissions in mind. Have you done so, guys? That's the question.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pollock, would you like to close? Oh, sorry, apologies. Councillor Tate.
Through you, Emeritus. It has got a question in it, don't worry about that.
You haven't spoken for or against, Councillor, so you can go for your life.
Okay, last week Councillor Pollock and myself were lucky enough to go out to the MORUYA Jockey Club and meet some of the trainers and our new star apprentice out there, young Amy. And Councillor Pollock asked some questions, and my first question was, do they feel that if Racing New South Wales had possession of the MORUYA racecourse, would they feel secure? And they were like little kids at a lolly bar. They all yelled out yes. Then we started to talk about the actual term of racing and thoroughbred racing. These people start work 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, finish at 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night. This morning, most of those people that we met, they couldn't come here because they had what you call jump outs on. Now, for the uninitiated, jump outs for racehorses are a bit like children going to kindergarten, where they learn to start the process of being a thoroughbred racehorse. These people are professionals. It is a professional sport. It is not an amateur sport. These people that we spoke to all stated that they thought if Racing New South Wales was the governing body of the MORUYA racecourse, their businesses would increase. They could not see in any way that Racing New South Wales would let the course or the infrastructure denigrate. Just the people out there, the money that comes into our Shire through the MORUYA Jockey Club is already counted in millions, and therefore the ongoing opportunity for trainers to increase their stable numbers just by 1 or 2 out of the stables we've got out there is hundreds of thousands of dollars into our community. If by some chance Racing New South Wales decided to increase our number of race days from 13 to 14 to 15, there's a possibility of another $300,000 coming into our community. One of the points that was brought up was the fact that the age of the population of the people that go out there And I believe that over half of our members, or very close, are all retired. And you go out there and have a look to see the demographic age barrier of the people out there, mate, they're all like me. They go out there because they can relax, they can enjoy themselves. And as was pointed out today, you do not have to drink and you do not have to bet out there. Whether you go out there to enjoy yourself is totally up to you. And once again, the club and the facility for someone to go and invest their money out there is 13 days a year. We've got amazing other facilities in our Shire that are open 365 days of the year, where people go and invest their money and they're told on it they've got no hope of winning. The MORUYA Jockey Club has stood up and is one of the only few clubs that is racing with the black figures behind their name. Racing New South Wales aren't deals. They're not going to invest in something that they don't see that they can invest in for the community. So I honestly can only see that everyone in our Shire will be miles and miles in front, and hopefully in many, many years to come that our younger families coming through will still be going out, as is pointed out, to our MORUYA Jockey Club where everyone enjoys themselves. So I can most definitely congratulate the MORUYA Jockey Club committee as it is, and I totally agree with the sale for those different reasons.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nathan, it must be a question.
It is, thank you, Madam Mayor. Earlier you raised the issue of an equine centre. So my question is, has there been any inquiry on an international level over the last 5-10 years maybe, of breeders or people in the equine industry who are interested in coming to MORUYA, especially with the proximity of the airport and the beach for breeding and training purposes, especially also with an upgraded course? And I'm going to be naughty and apologise to Mr Constable while we're here. I wish I could have voted for your amendment, but I was a little bit hamstrung. I'm also was the chair of the Pathways Committee.
Councillor, look, I think if you want more detail on the question that you have raised, I think that would require us doing a bit more investigation. But what I will say is this, is that currently out at the MORUYA Racecourse there are a number of residents that are associated with the training of racehorses at that venue. And, you know, with the investment of Racing New South Wales, and from my understanding with conversations with both members of the MORUYA Jockey Club and with members, with representatives from Racing New South Wales, it is absolutely clear that part of their intention is not just the focus on the race days themselves, but in the expansion and the realisation of the potential that is out there for a centre of training excellence. As far as it being a breeding and horse raising area, I probably think it would be very limited in that potential, but that is not to say that there's some beautiful areas in our rural lands that could not be utilised for that purpose. Hope that answers your question. Councillor Pollock.
Thank you, Mayor. There's obviously a few experts sitting around this chamber because we've heard from them all. It's about opportunity cost. Don't sit here today and say, oh, that's not enough. You've got about 100 or 200 acres immediately to the north. What's its entitlement? One house. That's what that land is worth. So don't talk tripe about, oh, we're not getting enough, because it's the opportunity cost. When is it going to be? Oh, we'll sit and do nothing for the next 10 years because we'll get more then. And Racing New South Wales has moved on and developed half a dozen other facilities within the state at the cost and lost opportunity in this area. You've got one opportunity now. This council is not in the business of running racecourses. It has been very fortuitous that we were able to make an area available. it's been even more fortuitous that there were people with vision and prepared to put hard work in to develop what's there today. Don't stifle progress. There is every opportunity. Now, you've heard from the number 2 man in Racing New South Wales. This has been identified as a great opportunity for investment and expansion. Goodness gracious, get out of the way and let the professionals get in and do it properly.
Thank you, councillors. Councillors, I will put the matter to the vote. Those in favour? Those in favour are myself, Councillor Liz Innes, Councillor Brown, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Nathan, Councillor Tate, Councillor Constable, Councillor Pollock. Those against are Councillor Mayne and Councillor McGinley. The vote has been carried. Thank you, councillors.